So welcome everybody. My name is Rob Malcolm. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Imagine Communications. I'm very honored to be joined by John Litster, the Managing Director of Sky Media Europe today. John runs a team of more than 400 people responsible for selling advertising across 130 channels worth more than £1 billion a year. So John, you've seen a huge amount of success in your career, and I'm hugely thankful for the opportunity to just better understand you and Sky and how you guys have been so successful over the years, and also talk a little bit about what the future might hold. One of the advantages, obviously, of working for a company like Imagine is we get to interact with all kinds of broadcasters and media companies around the world. And as a consequence of that interaction, we get to see various trading models, different ways of selling advertising. And what we've come to realize, and I think it's a belief that's largely held, is that the UK's way of trading television advertising is a much more efficient way of doing things. John, could you talk a little bit about the background and the history of how the UK trades and what it actually entails?
Yeah, sure, Rob. Really happy to be here as well. Yeah, so my career sort of strands around 25 years at Sky and probably another 5 to 8 years before that at ITV. And when I first started selling, the ITV companies that were around then were in the process of transitioning from a spot sell into an audience-based sell. There were 14, I think, ITV franchises. They all pretty much sold the same schedule, but because they were delivered to a different set of audiences from populations across the country, the audience profiles that were being delivered by the same programs were different depending on what region you were in. Some regions were more upmarket than others, some were older than others, some were more down market than others. So I think in its nascent stages, the transition from a spot sell to an audience sell was just about selling the audiences that were best suited to the sort of regions that the ITV companies were representing. So we started selling 3 or 4 broad audiences, and in that I would include adults, ABC One adults, probably a broader young adult, a 16 to 44-year-old adult, and then house persons with children household. And they were sort of the 4 stable audiences that we sold, and it allowed each individual TV company, as I said, to some degree maximize the yield that they were getting from the audiences that they were selling, because certain audiences they were stronger for than others. So that was the start of the portfolio sell, if you like, because it was at that point that we'd moved from a spot sell to a target audience sell. And in the very early stages, the TV companies, the ITV sales companies, also sold Channel 4. Channel 4 didn't have their own separate sales house. So we would be on the one hand selling an ITV franchise channel, and on the other hand selling Channel 4. And even then you could see there were different dynamics at play in terms of the audiences that those 2 channels were delivering. And there would be certain pockets in either of those channels where a particular audience would be more efficiently delivered. So that's how we first started this idea of selling across a portfolio and selling target audiences that are relevant across the portfolio. If you fast forward 25 years, as you said in the introduction, Sky Media is selling over 130 different channels. Audience fragmentation accelerated around 2010 to 2012 when the UK started what was known as the digital switchover, and that meant that all the signals were then going to be delivered by digital, which meant a plethora of channels were introduced to TV boxes around the country, and that meant that there was a chunk load of audience segmentation, but it meant there was an opportunity for us, because it meant that we could look at particular strands of channels that were delivering particular audiences and segment those channel strands and further adopt the portfolio sell, to the degree now that we're engaged with agencies in trading some 15 to 20 plus barb audiences. Back in the day, it was 3 or 4 audiences. And we can use the individual channels within the portfolio to work out which channels are most relevant for what target audiences. And we've been doing that slowly but surely over a period of time as we've acquired more and more ad sales representation. And likewise, Channel 4 are selling a lot more multi-channel channels than they were previously, and ITV have got their own 4 variants. So we are all to a degree selling a portfolio of channels and using the portfolio sell, but that doesn't mean to say that precludes us, Channel 4 or ITV, from getting what they believe is it's worth for big peak programs on ITV, big peak programs on Sky Atlantic or on Sky Sports, big peak programs on Channel 4. So it's misleading to suggest that because you go down a portfolio sell mechanism, that you can't maximize the revenues on the particular channel or program verticals, because you can do the best of both worlds.
Right.
And I think the important thing is that the agency fraternity in the UK accept that as the way of going about doing things.
And John, obviously, one of the mechanisms that you guys use to balance supply and demand is the average station price, or the station average price. Could you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah. So you go back 25, 30 years, and I know this is still the case in certainly Germany, Italy, and the US. There was a theoretical make good element to people when they were purchasing spots of us, because they were making an assumption about what a particular spot or a particular selection of spots was going to do in terms of rating points. And at the end of the campaign, if we didn't deliver on those rating points, there'd be a make good. So we were doing that back in the day. But because of the fluctuation in both demand and supply within the TV audience in the UK, we got together with the agencies and agreed the principles around a thing called station average price, which means that we agree up front a price against which people will be buying a particular target audience from us. And in the month in which the campaign is running, if the audience either increases or decreases relative to the original planned audience delivery, or revenues in aggregate increase or decrease over and above that, then we apply a market inflation or deflation mechanic to the price. So in essence, the price floats in the marketplace on a monthly basis, and we reconcile against that monthly price. So the benefit of that for a TV company is, in the past, it seemed to be a bit of a one-sided affair, whereby we were giving out make goods, but if an audience over-delivered, we weren't getting any benefit for that. The way that we work in the UK is that if there is an over-delivery, then in essence, the agency have a make good obligation to us. So the next time that particular advertiser comes on, we may draw down on a credit that we have delivered to them in the past. So we think that's a more equitable solution, and it also allows us to monetize all of our inventory all of the time. And that's particularly relevant when you trade a station average price, or you trade gross rating points with a long tail of small channels, where 3 weeks out of 4, a particular advertising break doesn't actually register a rating point. And because of that, agencies in the past may have been loath to actually commit to buying those spots. But the point is, there's a lost opportunity there, because on that 4th week of the 4 week period, the spot actually does do a rating. What that enables us to do is we don't take any value from it for the first 3 weeks. But in the 4th week, when it delivers a rating, we're able to extract some value, i.e. some money from an advertiser for doing that. And that gives both us and the agency some sense of comfort, because we all know that eventually, even though they may be buying some 0 rating breaks, which are difficult to forecast actually, eventually we'll be able to slot all of the ratings and make and monetize all of the value that's in there. So I think that was an important development for us. And as I said, with a plethora of channels that are in and around that area where the ratings prediction is difficult because of this increased audience fragmentation, having the safeguard of a reconciliation process at the end of a month means that agencies are comfortable booking into spots that they don't necessarily see any value in on a 1 or 2 week period.
And so obviously, one of the things that we find when we talk to broadcasters who are not selling, in a portfolio way, We call it adaptive audience fulfillment simply because there's no name that really truly explains in the industry, what we're talking about here. But when we talk to broadcasters, they're fearful because they think that they have to sell all of their inventory in this way, and they fear that their premium spots, whether it be in live sports or whether it be in kind of premium programming, that they have to stop selling a spot. Could you talk a little bit about how, in actual fact, you can have both of these worlds operating in conjunction with one another?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is they do operate in conjunction, and they do across all of the TV channels or the TV sales houses in the UK. But from a Sky Media perspective, we will sell to advertisers a range of target audiences. And if you think specifically about a car, that car may well be targeting ABC One adults. And we would slot that car in a cross section of the channels that we believe are most relevant for delivering that particular target audience. So it won't be all 130 channels. There'll be certain channels, maybe MTV by way of an example, that don't necessarily seem relevant to a purchaser of a car. And we will be able to slot across those channels that we think best deliver ABC One adults. And some of those channels' average rating size will be 0.5, and some of them will be 3.5 or 5.5. It depends. The key thing about the portfolio sell is you're delivering a target audience, and that the aggregation of that target audience. But while that's going on in the background, if you like, there may be some specific programs that particular client is desperate for. And in the case of a car, for instance, it may well be that they're interested in particular marks appealing to ABC One men. So we would slot them into our golf and our rugby union at a premium. So we would run a separate price and indeed a separate target audience for that particular segment of the inventory they are buying, but still sell in the background the rest of the campaign against ABC One adults. And what the landmark system enables us to do is to maximize the yield within the ABC One adult portfolio, pick the best spots that we can for that particular target audience across a range of channels. But at the same time, it gives us the ability to book separately, manually, the spots that we believe we could charge a premium for, a high premium for, and book accordingly. So it's wrong for anyone to think that the portfolio sell completely negates any ability for people to maximize the program verticals or the channel verticals. That's not the case at all. You sort of get the best of both worlds, and you're able to do both. And importantly, we do that because in the media audit world, when people are post reconciling the campaigns and looking at what they've got, context still remains really key. Television is about brand building, and it's about contextual selling as much as it's about, in this more fragmented world, automating the trading process and making it as simple as and efficient as possible. There is still a lot of time that needs to be spent making sure that those big programs, be they on ITV, on Channel 4 or Sky or anywhere else for that matter, still are able to create the value and the price premium that they do.
So it's a good segue to the efficiency of the operation, and obviously one of the things that broadcasters around the world are doing is not only are they trying to grow revenue, but they're also trying to make themselves more efficient, because fundamentally what it costs you to run your operation is a big part of your bottom line. And I think Sky has demonstrated a fairly amazing feat of being able to grow many times over over the last 10 years without substantially increasing your headcount. Could you talk a little bit more about the efficiencies and how selling in the way that you do lends itself to scaling efficiently?
Yeah, I think in the first instance you have to have a pretty clear sales policy around an approach to market that is reasonably clear, and a way of transacting business with the media agencies that is clear to them. And if you've got the right systems in place, you can scale it. And that's what we've been able to do with Imagine over the last, as you say, 10 to 15 years. We've increased our scale from being a 10% share of the market to a 35% share of the market in terms of audience over a period of time. And we've been able to do it because we approach the market and the way that we trade with them in an identical way across every customer that we have. What that means is that as and when an agency comes to us and wants to buy a campaign, the approval process is the same wherever, and we have an approval process system that talks to Landmark. We then cross-check the approval process with the deal agreement that we have contracted with the agency, which sits in Landmark, and we can cross-check against the two. We then auto-book the schedules, the majority of the schedules, probably 90% of all the schedules, before we overlay the specials and the Sky Sports stuff. And then we reconcile at the other end an invoice, and we do that all in exactly the same way. So as and when we get different channels that come on board, I'm really oversimplifying here, and it's your business and a load of people in my operations business to make this simple.
Yeah.
But we just add another row in the channel listing, and it enables us to do it. Now, obviously, with increased scale, you are going to be bringing in increased headcount because you need to make sure you're servicing properly, and we need to make sure that we are yield managing as much as we possibly can. But the numbers of incremental heads that we have brought into the business relative to the revenue growth and the audience growth that we've been able to grow over a period of time are massively apart. You know, it's a factor of 10%, I would suggest. The other thing that's now happening is we have scaled the number of channels we represent, and we're now obviously scaling the number of platforms on which the content is being served. And that's another key development, but we're able to do that within the Landmark infrastructure as well, which is key, because as audiences fragment, and as in the entertainment space, more linear viewing is migrating into the VOD viewing, we need to make sure that we're getting full bang for our buck in both the linear space and, importantly, the VOD space going forward. And what we've done within Sky Media is introduce a thing called One Campaign, which is basically our attempt to sell one target audience, one barb measured target audience across our linear set-top box television and all of our VOD platforms as well. And the reason we're behind doing that is our customer is indifferent as to how they see our content. Oftentimes they forget that they're watching it in the on-demand space. They think they're watching it live linear, and they're not. They've gone into a catch-up mode and have forgotten about it. So if our customer base and the audience generally is indifferent about where they see the product, we figure that we should be able to sell that indifference on to the agencies in terms of, it doesn't matter whether it's being viewed in the linear space or the VOD space. If we can conjoin the two together and Landmark can help us do it, we're maximizing our yields even further, because there are pockets of efficiency by target audience across platforms as well as within channels.
Right.
So we started that in January. We're doing it in bite-sized chunks. We haven't changed the world overnight, but most of the agencies that we talk to are fully engaged with us in trying to deliver one campaign for their advertisers on an ongoing basis. And thus far, we're reasonably happy with what's been going on. Yeah.
And so the school of thought really is that in the future, you know, and you mentioned it before about the importance of context. Whether somebody's watching Game of Thrones on a linear channel, whether they're watching it on VOD, shouldn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it's the experience, it's, you know, the context, it's the audience, and if you can join all of that together, you can and you can guarantee frequency and reach, you know, then, you know, the agencies and the brands should be happy as long as you can find the audience.
Yeah, look, there's going to be, I mean, all the TV companies have their own view about the speed with which audiences migrate from one place to another. So we've got something like Sky Atlantic, where already 50% of the audience of Sky Atlantic don't watch it in the live mode. They're watching it in either catch up or PVR, right?
Yeah.
Sky One is probably 70-30 linear to catch up, but then you get the other extreme. You get Sky Sports, which is 100% live viewed, 99% live viewed. Something like Line of Duty on the BBC, Sunday night, 9 o'clock, you know, those water cooler moments still will happen. ITV have many of those. We have a chunk load, Channel 4 still do. So there will be in the background, a migration from linear into sort of catch up world, but there will still be very, very strong chunks of linear viewing. And the idea of the portfolio sell and one campaign in combination is that we're allowed someone to track an audience across channel and across platform, and importantly, track a program across channel and across platform as well. And that we believe is where the future is going to be taking us. And then, of course, on top of that, you overlay data above and beyond the Barb data through things like AdSmart, our addressable solution, and you get to a pretty neat place with TV, because you get flexibility in terms of where you're delivering an audience, but you also get a really niche audience as well, or a targeted audience.
Agreed. So when we speak to broadcasters who are still selling, you know, a large amount of fixed place spots with guaranteed GRPs, and we explain, you know, the portfolio sell and selling on audience, you know, typically you get 2 or 3 objections. The first objection is, wow, that sounds complicated. The second objection is, well, you know, agencies will never buy that way. You know, they want, you know, this kind of best of both worlds. They want to be able to pick the spot and get the guaranteed audience. Could you, you know, just talk about those objections and maybe, you know, offer some advice to those broadcasters who are trying to replicate, you know, what you guys at Sky have done?
So I suppose in the first instance, the thing that we did was we just sold the benefits to them from a position of relative weakness, right? If you think about it, you go back 15, 20 years when we started the portfolio sale, we were only about 5% share of the market. So it wasn't like we were in a position where we could just turn around and say, this is what we're going to do, and you're going to like it or lump it. I think what you do is you approach the agencies, you approach change in terms of bite-sized chunks. But I've got to believe there is a real opportunity both in the US, in Italy, in Germany, and in other places to change now, purely and simply because of the platform fragmentation as well as the channel fragmentation. So, you know, talking about a program vertical in isolation in the linear space, quite frankly, is missing probably 30 or 40% of the value. And I suppose one of the answers is to talk about that challenge. Don't put your head in the sand. Talk about that challenge with clients, because clients will make sense of it. You know, a lot of media people, you know, when you ask them the question, what have they been watching, will talk to you about a bunch of things that they have been watching, and probably 7 out of 10 of them wouldn't have watched it in the live environment. So talking about a portfolio sell and talking about being able to pick up that target audience across the portfolio and across the various platforms has to be a sensible solution going forward. So it's almost just ask yourself how you're viewing. Well, this is how we want to sell to you, because that's the way it should be. I think people do get worried about the relative level of complication, but ultimately, I don't think it's that complicated, and I think it will be the future. I think that there'll be, in a few years' time, there'll probably be 60-70% of all inventory that's sold that is automated in some way, shape, or form. To the degree that the transaction that actually takes place is an automated one between an agency's systems and our systems. But there's always going to be context. There's always going to be 30%, 40%, depending on what month you're in, where there's a contextual buy, and people will want to be interested in particular programs. And there will always be program requests from agencies, but the point is they can still be accommodated within a portfolio cell. The
Right.
way that we've constructed, the system with Imagine is that, as I said, we can auto-generate most of the campaign, but within that auto-generation, it will suggest that we want to deliver 15% of the ratings in post-2000 peak on our pay entertainment channels on Atlantic, Sky One and Witness. It will make sure that we are delivering 15% of our airtime in Sky News at weekend daytime, etc. You can do that, so you can prescribe the context to it, so the agencies don't feel as though they're losing control. This isn't just a free-for-all. This is you are still giving the agency contextual safeguards around how you will be slotting the airtime, and then obviously you've got the icing on the cake at the other end, which is the key programs that are must-haves for them. And the other benefit is, if you get that right, if you get the portfolio cell right, and the one thing that I mentioned right at the start, but we need to remind ourselves of, is the key benefits that you derive from a portfolio cell are those when you sell more than one or two audiences. You have to sell more audiences so that you can identify where the pockets of efficiency are for those audiences. And dare I say it, you may not give this to the agencies, but if you get your efficiencies done properly, you in effect create for yourself more inventory, even though the inventory stayed the same, because you're giving away less adult inventory for every key targeted audience that you deliver. So in a world where linear audiences are declining to a degree, being able to maximize via a portfolio cell actually extends the lifetime of being able to deliver linear audiences, because you're giving away less to other people. There's less wastage. And I think that will be key going forward, and a massively key benefit. And that transition from linear to VOD as well, getting people indifferent to doing that from a pricing perspective and a perception perspective, I think is key.
And so just in terms of the number of audiences, John, I think you guys probably started on 2 or 3 broad audiences, 20 years ago, and that's grown to about 100. Do you have a sense for, how many audiences, a broadcaster should be selling in order to get a real taste for that extension of the inventory and finding the pockets of efficiency?
Look, I think it depends on the market, but there's probably 5 broader audiences that take up 80% of the revenue we make in the linear space. So it'll be ABC One adults, 16 34-year-old adults, house persons with children, and in the case of Sky, given the particular bent towards sport, 16 34 men. Over and above that, there's obviously greater segmentation through what we're doing in AdSmart. So you could narrow down ABC One adults to AB adults with a household income 70,000 plus or whatever it may be. So I don't think there's a prescriptive answer to the number of target audiences that should be sold. It depends on the efficiency with which those audiences can be delivered, but at the same time, it also depends on the demand. You go through peaks and troughs of demand for certain target audiences. So one year, for instance, 16 44-year-old adults might be de rigueur and everyone's buying that rather than 16 34s, and then they go back to. So I don't think you can be prescriptive. I just think what you need is a system that allows you to flip between target audiences as you go along, and obviously the more addressable audiences you can overlay on top of that, the less relevant some of the broader audiences become. But there is still always a high demand for the broadest of audiences, because TV's all about building fame quickly. So we'll always have that.
All right. And so obviously, as you embark on one campaign and the future of true cross-platform selling, there will, I guess, to some degree come a point where I think the industry would like a single currency. Could you talk a little bit about your thoughts just around the future of single currency and where we might be going in that regard?
I think I think inevitably we'll get to a single currency, because as we see audiences migrate from one place to another, the currency that we sell in the linear space relative to an impression sold in VOD is the mixing of the two becomes inevitable, I think. So we've started that process with one campaign this year. We have we through C-Flight, which is something that we worked with our colleagues in NBC Universal on. We're able to offer an advertiser, an agency, deduplicated reach and frequency across BARB audiences. So we've worked with RSMB to overlay our VOD audiences onto our linear audiences and identify a 16-34-year-old adult as BARB would define it in the linear space, and follow that 16-34-year-old adult into the VOD space. As everyone's aware, there is a different price at the moment, a price threshold for for a 16-34-year-old adult in the linear space and in the VOD space. So in year one of one campaign, all we are saying to our customers is we will deliver 16-34-year-old adults in the linear space at this price and in the VOD space at this price. We can merge the price after the event, but we'll still keep them separate. And the reason we're keeping them separate in the first instance is to my point about bite-sized chunks with the agency, right? There's skepticism, there's a little bit of fear of the unknown with agencies. But if you're clear up front about the pricing mechanic being, or the pricing number being this in linear and that in VOD, and you blend after the event, I think there's a bit more comfort around it. What we will do after a year of trading the two numbers separately, we'll have a year of data, and we'll have a conversation with them next year about the blending of the pricing. The sort of technical mechanics of it are, and one of the challenges behind it is that at the moment, that split may be 90-10 linear VOD. In a year's time, after we've gone through the coming out the other side of lockdown, that split might have moved from 80-10 from 90-10 to 80-20. And if you've upfront weighted the prices on a 90-10 mix rather than an 80-20, an agency's either going to feel as though they've got a bargain from you or they've been stitched. So the point about the suck it and see principle, I think, is a relevant one. But I think everyone agrees it's the right thing to do. And everyone absolutely agrees with the principles of one campaign. But price is obviously a key element of it. And doing what we're doing at the moment, we believe, keeps both parties happy until we have a fuller view of how the blending may happen going forward.
And it seems, I was just going to say, it seems logical that, as the viewing evolves, at some point it'll get to an equilibrium where there will be an element of linear and there'll be an element of VOD. And if that doesn't change too much year to year, maybe that's the opportune time to blend the currency. But that could be a decade away. It's hard to know, right? So the challenge is, and I've mentioned this before. What we're trying to do in the VOD space is take all the good bits of how we go about transacting our linear business. I'm not saying that everything we do in the linear space is absolutely perfect, but the fact that we can automate the process the degree to which we do and make it really easy for agencies to spend money with us is something that we want to try and replicate in the VOD space, that we're not there yet. So the sooner we can replicate all that systems infrastructure, all those approval processes and that reconciliation into the overall one campaign sale, the better for everyone, I think. And that's an ambition of ours that I think we'll achieve over the next 6 to 18 months. And so, John, just a question around the television experience. Obviously, what makes TV great is just the superior viewing experience, the context, the brand safety, and there are some people, I guess, from a digital background that would say, well, why don't you just plug in some programmatic supply and just basically fill it up with, sort of digital-like advertising? Could you talk a little about, the future, as it relates to that and brand safety? Every TV company in the UK and anywhere else in the world, I imagine, for
that matter, as a you know, a massive advantage over our digital competition, in as much as we do have a brand safe environment in which advertising can thrive, and that will never change. And one of the key things that that Landmark enables us to do is to make sure that from a regulatory perspective, that we're not doing anything that we shouldn't be doing. And even in our VOD offering and our Sky Pub offering, for that matter, we are applying the same Ofcom rules that apply to us in the linear world to our digital stroke out of home offering, right? And we'll continue to do that. We'd like to think that, you know, the benchmark has been set high by what goes on in the linear space, and we think it will serve us right and proper to replicate that in all the other platforms in which we turn our hand. So that won't change for us. And I've got the, you know, I've got to believe that, and I think it's evidenced to a degree by the amount of money that's returning quite quickly into the TV coffers post lockdown, or post the worst of COVID, that TV's in a good place at the moment. I think it got into the national psyche, certainly in the UK at the start of lockdown. Everyone was turning to watch news. Sky News had its best year in 10 years, 12 years. ITV News, BBC News, all the news channels did really well. The terrestrial channels did really well across the whole period, but TV generally did really, really well. And I think what's happened is that, given that a lot of brands were absent from consumers' knowledge for quite some time because of lockdown, they weren't going into retail stores, TV's brand building power has grown. And I think that now that shops are opening again, we're seeing an upsurge in brand activity because they want to make themselves famous again. We'll continue to do that for them, but we'll continue to do it in the environment in which they know it's safe. So that, you know, as I said, the rules in linear will apply in our VOD space and in our digital space for forevermore, sort of thing.
Well, John, thank you again for your time and your immense experience in the industry. I've certainly found this fascinating, and I really enjoyed speaking to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.